In the summer of 1881, a select group of 25 men set out on a mission that combined science, ambition, and national pride. They were soldiers, scientists, and sailors tasked with establishing a research station at the very edge of the known world. Their destination, Lady Franklin Bay on the remote northern coast of Ellesmere Island, a land locked in ice and shadow for most of the year. Their goal was simple on paper: collect scientific data and advance human understanding of the polar frontier. But what began as a measured step toward discovery soon became a descent into starvation, mutiny, and madness, an ordeal so grim that it remains one of the most haunting survival stories of the 19th century. This is the story of the Greely expedition, a stark reminder of how thin the line is between determination and doom. Leading the expedition was Lieutenant Adolphus Greely, an intelligent, disciplined, and fiercely loyal officer. But in the unforgiving Arctic, discipline can turn into rigidity, and loyalty can become a dangerous refusal to bend. His decisions, some necessary, some catastrophic, would shape the fate of every man under his command. The expedition began with optimism. Their steamship, the Proteus, threaded its way through the shifting Greenland Sea, its hull cracking through fresh ice. The men gazed out at towering cliffs carved by glaciers older than civilization itself. As they sailed farther north, the sun dipped lower each night until it finally vanished beneath the horizon, revealing a realm illuminated only by the shimmering glow of the aurora. It was beautiful, serene, and utterly indifferent to them. When they reached Lady Franklin Bay, the men built a sturdy base they named Fort Conger. For a time, life was orderly and even productive. Scientific instruments clattered softly in the cold, weather logs were filled with careful handwriting, and hunting teams tracked muskoxen across the frozen tundra. Spirits remained high. They fully believed the supply ships promised by the U.S.N. government would arrive each summer, bringing food, letters, and fresh hope. But the Arctic is a patient predator, and it was waiting. In the first year, the ship never arrived. Ice choked the waters, sealing the northern channels like stone. The men rationed their supplies and told themselves rescue would come the next year. They clung to their routines, celebrating holidays with whatever they could spare and reading books aloud to keep their morale from slipping. Slowly, they marked the passing of days under a sky that shifted from pale pink to abyssal black. The second year came, and again, the supply ship failed to break through. The expedition's isolation hardened into a grim realization. They had been abandoned, not out of malice, but because nature itself had closed the door behind them. Greely knew they couldn't survive a third winter at Fort Conger. Their food was dwindling, and the hunting had grown scarce. The caribou and muskoxen had migrated, sensing the deepening cold long before the men understood its implications. Greely made a decision that would determine everything. He ordered his men to abandon Fort Conger and march south along the coast to Cape Sabine, where earlier expeditions had supposedly left emergency supply caches. According to their maps, enough food was waiting there to survive until relief finally came. But the Arctic had shifted in unpredictable ways. Storms tore across the coastline, thick fog hid crevices, and the temperature plunged lower than any of them had ever experienced. The march itself became a battle against exhaustion, frostbite, and despair. When they finally arrived at Cape Sabine, the truth hit them like a hammer. The caches were there, but they were shockingly, disastrously small. They contained only a fraction of what the men needed. Barrels of food had been misplaced, damaged, or never delivered at all. The soldiers stared at the pitiful pile of rations with hollow disbelief. They had expected lifelines. What they found were crumbs. Still, they tried to hold on. They built a makeshift shelter they called Camp Clay, using rocks and scraps of canvas torn from their boats. The wind roared through the cracks, and the cold crept into their bones. Each man felt the weight of the Arctic pressing down, a slow, relentless pressure that suffocated hope. Food was rationed to the smallest imaginable portions. Greely gave each man a few ounces of meat per day, measured with military precision. They boiled scraps of leather for broth. They chewed on the remnants of sealskin boots. They set traps for anything that moved, but the land was barren. Starvation soon consumed the camp. Men who had once marched proudly now staggered like ghosts, their eyes sunken and their ribs visible. Muscles wasted away, minds faltered. Some became delirious, talking to shadows or imagining they smelled fresh bread drifting across the frozen air. Others grew quiet, their spirits slipping away long before their bodies did. Greely's authority remained firm, but it strained under the weight of desperation. When one man, Sergeant Henry, was caught stealing food, a crime that meant stealing life from everyone else, Greely faced an unbearable choice. He chose to enforce discipline in the harshest way possible. Henry was executed, shot by his comrades at Greely's command. Some saw it as necessary, others as monstrous. In that frozen camp, morality had been reduced to a brutal calculus of survival. As the long winter dragged into spring, death moved through the camp like a silent visitor. One by one, men slipped away, their bodies too frozen to bury, were covered with snow and rocks. The survivors tried not to look at the growing mound beside the camp. By June of 1884, Greely and a handful of men were barely clinging to life, their skin stretched tight over bone. Greely himself could hardly move, but he forced himself to maintain the discipline that had defined his career. Then, through the drifting fog, salvation appeared. The rescue ships Thetis and Bear finally arrived at Cape Sabine. The sailors who stepped ashore expected to find a scientific outpost. Instead, they found a nightmare. They discovered emaciated men lying motionless on the ice, barely recognizable as human. Only 6 of the original 25 were still alive. The rescuers carried them aboard on stretchers, their bodies so light that the sailors wept as they lifted them. Beside the bodies of the dead, they found journals preserved in the cold. Their pages told the story with heartbreaking clarity: the rations, the weather, the discipline, and the slow descent into death, all documented with Greely's unflinching precision. The world reacted with shock and horror. How had such an expedition been allowed to fail so terribly? The Greely survivors became symbols of both endurance and administrative failure, heroes and victims at the same time. But the deeper story was more complex. Despite everything, Greely's expedition had achieved remarkable scientific results. They collected detailed meteorological data, mapped uncharted coastlines, and even set a new farthest north record. Their achievements expanded the world's understanding of the Arctic, but those contributions were forever overshadowed by the darkness of their suffering. Greely himself was thrust into a strange legacy. Some praised him for holding the expedition together. Others criticized him for inflexible leadership that may have worsened the tragedy. In his later years, Greely became a respected general, but those who knew him said the Arctic never left him. He carried the memories like frostbite on the soul. He outlived all his men, but he never truly escaped the eyes. Today, the remnants of Camp Clay still lie scattered across the desolate shore of Cape Sabine. Rusted tins, splintered wood, withered stones. The wind whistles over the ruins, carrying whispers of a story that endures not because of how these men died, but because of how fiercely they fought to live. It's a story of ambition, courage, and the thin line between command and catastrophe. It reminds us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humans possess a stubborn spark of hope, fragile, flickering, but impossible to extinguish. For 6 men, that spark burned just long enough. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as captivating as I did, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales from the depths of history.